Picture this with me. The October pasture glowed like old brass. Wade Holloway killed the engine on his dad's '72 John Deere. 3 shiny black Range Rovers rolled up to the far side of his fence. A woman stepped out, glaring right at him. "Hey, Flannel. You the help out here?" Wade didn't even turn around. "Listen carefully. That rust bucket of yours is trespassing on my future parking lot. Ride it home to whatever trailer you crawled out of and tell your boss the grown-ups are here now." 5 heavy seconds of silence. Meanwhile, up in Dallas, Garrett Pike signed the Comanche Springs survey order. The very next morning broke bright and cold. That perfect Texas autumn air smelling heavily of dry mesquite and wood smoke. The Dusty Bell Diner anchored the corner of Main and Pecan over in Cedar Hollow. Griddle steam fogged the windows. Booths were packed with local men wearing feed caps. Then the little bell jingled over the front door. Adeline Voss marched in. She carried that loud, fragile arrogance of someone who had never once been told to wait for a table. She claimed the best booth by the window, dropped a paper cup of overpriced city coffee, and flipped open her laptop. The local county appraiser was already running late, but she clearly didn't care. Her expensive smartphone buzzed, and she snatched it up immediately. "Closing Vista Larga inside 90 days. Yes, I have it on the calendar." Her voice was pure Dallas, fake warm and painfully impatient, the kind of loud tone trained to dominate the entire room. "Tell Boyd if he wants the property easement language tightened, he can fly down himself." Down at the far end of the counter, a quiet man in a faded flannel was cutting pancakes for a little girl with a braid. He didn't even bother looking up. He didn't have to. He recognized that demanding voice. The second call came in 3 minutes later. Garrett Pike. Wade could faintly hear the corporate chairman's voice leaking from the receiver, smooth and silken. "The neighboring land parcel matters, Adeline. Talk to the holdout. Charm him if you absolutely must. Offer 8 figures if it gets us moving. We need that water easement completely clean before the commercial bond rating comes through." Adeline rolled her eyes at her coffee. "Garrett, it's just a hick with a tractor. He'll sign for $2 million and a handshake. I'll have the contract on your desk by Friday." Ivy looked up from her syrupy pancakes. "Daddy, why's that lady talk so loud?" "Now stick with me here." Wade kept his eyes fixed on the plate, quietly cutting another piece of pancake. "Some people use loud to cover small, sweetheart." Adeline abruptly ended the phone call. She stretched her tight shoulders, glanced around the diner, and her eyes suddenly caught his. A flicker. A brief second of pure recognition. Her expression didn't shift at all, but the very tips of her ears flushed a faint pink. She stood straight up and walked over. She stopped beside his worn booth as if it were her own brilliant idea. "Mr." Wade didn't bother offering his name. He just took a slow sip of black coffee, watching her calmly over the rim of his cup. Adeline deployed her expensive professional smile, the exact one she'd paid a Dallas coach $8,000 to perfect. "I'd really like to discuss your rural property line at some point. Convenient for you?" Wade set his cup down. "Property line's been there since 1887, ma'am." "Hasn't moved." She firmly slapped a card onto the table. "Fancy cream stock, dark blue ink, 0 graphics." She marched out without ever looking back. Little Ivy reached over, grabbed the card, flipped it upside down, and squinted hard, as if the wrong side held all the real answers. Wade just slid it into his flannel pocket, without even bothering to read it. That night he stood quietly on the cedar porch of the White House. We know who holds the real power, watching those surveyor headlights sweep his massive pasture beyond the creek. 1 light flickered from the Vista Larga property, then 2, 4. 8 o'clock the next morning. Marisol Reyes answered the phone in her tiny 2-room legal office above the local hardware store. Adeline was already barking orders mid-sentence before the line even fully connected. "I need a list of holdout landowners adjacent to Vista Larga. Anyone whose signature might be required for easement adjustment. I want it within the hour." Marisol calmly grabbed her notepad with one hand, her morning coffee in the other. She rattled off 3 names, nice and slow. None of them was Wade Holloway. "What about the parcel to the east of Vista Larga?" Adeline pressed her. "The one with the old white house and the John Deere. I drove past it yesterday. Who owns that?" Marisol set her coffee down. "That land is privately held. Owner doesn't take meetings." She hung up before Adeline could argue. Then Marisol just sat there at her desk, staring blankly at the wall for 60 seconds. Finally, she opened the bottom drawer of her rusty filing cabinet. Tucked way back behind plain manila folders sat a heavy, worn leather binder. Hartley Cattle Company. Deed History 1887 to present. She pressed her palm flat against the cover. Didn't even open it, just pulled her hand back. 3 miles east, behind the horse barn, Wade climbed the wooden loft stairs he built himself after Eleanor passed away. Let's look closer. At first glance, these walls looked like standard stuff. Just typical cheap rancher keepsakes, right? Absolutely not. A framed bachelor's degree in agricultural economics from Texas A&M. Dean's List honors, sitting next to a fading black and white photograph. His great-grandfather taking a deed from a Texas land office clerk in 1887. And a modern hydrology survey, color-coded by aquifer zones, showing Comanche Springs dead in the center. That thick blue line of water flow headed straight east, cutting right through Hartley Cattle Company land, before reaching anyone else. 14,000 acres of Vista Larga survived on water that couldn't legally move without Wade's ink. You and I both know, without Wade's signature, not one drop crosses that fence. He calmly picked up the phone and dialed his high-powered law firm in Austin. Theo, pull all the easement files. Every page Voss Meridian filed on the Vista Larga deal these past 6 months. Later that afternoon, Adeline's expensive Range Rover crunched up the long, dusty gravel driveway at Hartley. She brought a $400 bottle of Napa Cabernet from a Dallas wine shop, holding it with both hands like a flashy trophy. Wade just stood there, waiting on his porch. He took the fancy bottle, tossed it on the counter, and poured her a glass of cold well water from the icebox instead. Water here is older than the wine, ma'am. Try it first. She took a sip. Her expression shifted. It was perfectly clean, faintly mineral, and sweet on the finish. Where does this come from? Comanche Springs, 3 miles exactly that way. Been running since before the state of Texas existed. The wooden door creaked. Ivy walked in, leading their old Palomino mare named Biscuit by the halter. She stopped cold when she saw the corporate stranger inside her kitchen. Adeline, a woman who never bowed to anyone, carefully set the glass down and dropped to one knee. Hi, I'm Adeline. Who's your friend? This is Biscuit. She's old. So am I sometimes. Wade just watched them. He didn't speak. You and I know what's coming. Adeline paused by her car door. Mister, you and I are about to see real power work. What's it take for an easement? She demanded. Knowing your water plans, he said, walking inside. The heavy door shut. Later that evening, a sealed development file from Austin finally arrived by private courier. Wade took it upstairs to his loft. He turned the crisp pages slowly, absorbing every single detail. He stopped right where Theo left a bright yellow sticky note. A scanned internal corporate memo dated September 14th. The signature scrawled at the bottom was Garrett Pike's. The subject line detailed routing Comanche Springs water straight into a massive Austin metropolitan utility contract. By page 3, that contract was worth $400 million over 15 years, bleeding the spring dry in 7. Wade quietly folded the memo. He glanced up at the old wall clock. He muttered softly to the empty room. Eleanor would have burned this whole ranch down before handing it over. At 6 a.m., commercial surveyors crossed his fence. Wade was already up. Awake since 4:30, exactly his routine since Eleanor passed away. Sitting outside with black coffee, watching the sky behind the old live oaks shift from dark charcoal to soft peach. He spotted the first white surveyor flag pierce his side of the property line, then another. He set his mug down. He walked out perfectly calm and unhurried, his old leather boots kicking up tiny clouds of dust. He stopped 20 feet from the foreman. Gentlemen, you are standing on Hartley land. I need you to pack up your gear and step back across that fence. The rattled foreman quickly called Adeline. She arrived 20 minutes later, wearing a silk blouse and stiff new cowboy boots that screamed expensive but lacked miles. Mr. Holloway, my crew has full authorization from Vista Largo. If your property boundary is in dispute, I suggest taking it up with the county clerks. Wade paused, totally unfazed. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Sheriff Bender, it's Wade Holloway. Got 6 men trespassing on my property. I'd appreciate a deputy whenever you have the time. Sheriff Tom Bender pulled up 12 minutes later, driving a county cruiser coated in layers of dried dirt. He stepped out, settling his worn hat. He walked right past the flashy CEO, heading straight for Wade. Morning, Mr. Holloway, sir. What's going on? Adeline mentally flagged that respectful sir. She filed it away. The sheriff calmly faced the survey crew. He never raised his voice. True authority rarely needs to shout. Within 10 minutes, the crew yanked their flags, tossed their gear into 2 pickups, and retreated right back onto Vista Largo soil. Adeline stood frozen in the dirt. Suddenly, her designer blazer felt like completely useless armor for the rugged ranch land she was trying to conquer. When the dust settled, she didn't hide in her car. She slowly walked over to the fence. She rested both hands flat against the top rail. Wade quietly stepped up beside her. "Why does the sheriff call you, sir?" she asked. "His mom taught me 3rd grade," Wade replied. "That's how life works out here." Adeline had absolutely no response. From the shaded porch, little Ivy offered a small wave and a shy, quiet smile. Adeline instinctively waved back. She spent the entire drive back to her cheap Cedar Hollow motel in stunned silence. "You and I know the truth always surfaces." Inside room 12, she finally searched the county property database herself. Hartley Cattle Company, Mesa Blanca County records. 14,000 acres. Appraised at $118 million. Sole property owner, Wade Holloway. She read the glowing screen 3 separate times. Her arrogant parking lot insult echoed back in her own head. Flashy money talks, but real wealth just quietly watches you make a fool of yourself. The phone rang. Garrett Pike. She didn't flinch. She just let the call ring out. She flipped the device face down on the motel bedspread. "Let's step onto the ranch." That evening, Marisol drove up the gravel road, carrying a leather binder of legal threats. They sat out on the porch in the fading blue light. She placed the heavy binder on the table between them. Wade. Pike already filed paperwork through a shell company, trying to steal access to the Eastern Water Channel. Noisy Wealth doesn't ask nicely. He's going to try taking it by force, using both the courts and the politicians. Unbothered, Wade just poured 2 fingers of whiskey into their glasses. Wade stayed perfectly quiet. Then Marisol admitted Pike was holding leverage over her own son. "Daniel just made associate at a Dallas law firm, and Pike controls their advisory board. Because of that, I cannot be your lawyer on this fight, Wade." "I am sorry," Wade nodded once. "You do not need to be. Coming out here to tell me the truth is enough." 3 days later, Adeline returned. "You and I are about to see her drop the corporate armor. No expensive gifts." She left behind the slick contracts, the glowing tablet, and the eager assistant. Instead, she carried one plain folder she had meticulously studied line by line all night in her motel room. It was her own company's real estate purchase agreement, the very draft bearing her signature on page 41. 3 months ago, she had rushed through it twice at the airport before blindly signing. But last night she read it slowly and patiently, the way Eleanor used to study her seed catalogs. And right there on page 28, she located the clause that quietly allowed her company to drain the surface water from Comanche Springs right after closing the deal. She had signed it. She never truly understood the utter destruction she was authorizing. Wade was sitting quietly at his kitchen table when she stepped inside. "Secure wealth needs no fanfare." He poured her coffee without asking. "If I admitted this written deal would completely drain your ranch within 5 years," she asked him, "would you even believe me?" Wade just slid the warm mug over. "I would believe you were finally seeing the truth." She sat down. She dropped her designer purse onto the floor. There was no flashy laptop to hide behind anymore. Little Ivy padded barefoot from the living room, quietly holding out a simple sugar cookie wrapped in a paper napkin. The CEO accepted the humble gift with both hands, treating it like something incredibly fragile. "Thank you, Ivy." "You are welcome, Miss Adeline." Once they finished their coffee, Wade did something he had not done with an outsider in 4 long years. He stood up, calmly pulled a worn barn jacket from its peg, and held the heavy front door open for her. "Come with me. I want to show you something real." They took the long route around the south pasture, passing an old windmill that reliably pumped water without anyone demanding it. They passed the steady pecan grove Eleanor planted the very year Ivy was born. Up on the ridge behind the barn stood a massive live oak, its deep roots older than any corporate deed. Beneath it rested a saddle-sized piece of gray granite, completely unpretentious, carrying only a single name and 2 simple dates. A modest clay pot of bluebonnet seedlings rested quietly at the base. "My wife knew this soil better than I do," Wade quietly said. "She always said land does not belong to anyone, Wade. We belong to the land." Pike will never understand that, and I don't think you did either until this week. You and I can see the shift." She stared at the earth, completely too humbled to answer. "I grew up inside a high-rise, Mr. Holloway. My father only sold financial leverage. He went broke twice. He taught me that land was just a slow asset. And now? Now I'm not sure what I was taught was right." We watched them walk in total silence. By the barn, little Evie brushed the mare's flank with both hands, just happily babbling a steady stream of sweet nonsense. Adeline just stopped by the wooden fence, watching them. Wade paused right behind her, watching her study his little girl. The gap between her flashy world and his quiet reality, measured in years and thin air, finally shrank by one step. Not a single word spoken, neither of them pulled away. Up on the 43rd floor, the Dallas boardroom was all glass and expensive oiled walnut, boasting a downtown skyline view that used to make Adeline feel like a massive success. But that morning, taking her usual chair right beside Garrett Pike, that grand corporate view suddenly seemed much smaller now. Garrett kicked off the meeting, pushing a brutally fast timeline. 30 days to lock down the ranch deal, not 90. He wanted the water rights filed fast. You and I know that smug look he gave, joking about suing any noisy locals. Adeline kept her face completely blank. "The easement isn't simple," Garrett said. "That Hartley land dictates all the water. Without his ink, this whole deal dies." Garrett's cheap, arrogant grin never faded once. "Hartley is a sentimental guy," Adeline warned, "a widower with a kid. He'll fold for cash, and if he refuses, we force him." Garrett stood up. Pacing around the glossy table, he casually dropped a patronizing hand right on her stiff shoulder. "Let the grown-ups handle this," he sneered. Adeline sat frozen. She knew that exact phrase. She had weaponized it herself. Used it right in this flashy room on a young analyst just 8 months back. Spat it at a local contractor in town barely 3 days ago. She echoed it because Garrett had pulled that same arrogant trick on her 4 years ago, her very first week. She soaked up that toxic corporate swagger like a kid learning their parents' worst habits. She stayed absolutely perfectly still until the useless meeting finally ended. Then she slipped into the 43rd floor restroom, just staring into the fancy mirror for a long time without ever turning the water on. Pulling out her phone, she called Reyes. Off the record, "What kind of man is Wade Holloway, really?" 3 seconds of dead silence ticked by on the line. "The kind of man you never try to play twice." Adeline shoved the phone away. That very same night, she drove straight south. No calls to her corporate assistant, no time to pack a single bag. She drove 3 dark hours, leaving the cheap glare of the Dallas skyline behind, and arrived at the massive Hartley Ranch gates right at 1 a.m. Wade was awake. Secure men work, so he was in the barn, quietly fixing a saddle cinch for his morning ride. He caught the bright headlights, sweeping across the kitchen window. He strolled out, unlatched the heavy steel gate, and calmly waited. She stepped out. Keys left right in the ignition. "I am not here to buy your land, Mr. Holloway." He studied her for a quiet second, pushed the heavy gate wider, and nodded. "Then come on in, Miss Voss." But as her expensive shoes hit his gravel, that cell phone buzzed in her palm. An unknown number. She quickly looked down. A digital photo. A young guy wearing a graduation gown, posing proudly in front of a Texas A&M law sign. We see 6 dirty words below it. "Ask your friend Reyes to stay out of this." Signed GP. She stared at it, her fingers crushing the phone. She didn't show Wade. You and I know she didn't need to. He saw the sudden fear shift her face, and the quiet man never asked. I just tipped my head toward the porch. We sat there until the sky turned gray. Come morning, I drove her down to Cedar Hollow Feed and Tack, that long, low block on town's south edge. Bulk oats in a wooden bin by the door, and a hand-painted sign that read plain, "No credit." "No exceptions, sorry, Grandma." Old Hollis Vance had run that shop for 46 years. 78 years old, lean as a fence post. Hasn't missed a day since he buried his wife in 2004. The doorbell jingled. Hollis looked up and flashed me a grin. Then his eyes drifted past me to Adeline, sizing her up slow like a trader inspecting an unfamiliar mare. "This the Dallas lady I've been hearing about?" "That's her," I told him. Hollis slowly wiped his calloused hands on his faded apron. He turned his attention straight to Adeline. No malice in his voice, but no sugarcoating either. "Miss, your chairman rolled through here back in 19. Same fancy shoes, different face. Tried to buy me out of my land. I told him no. Pike said he'd find another way. Adeline didn't even blink. She held his gaze steady. Mr. Vance, do you know exactly what way he meant? Hollis gave a faint smile. He just waved for us to follow him to the back. The storage room of Cedar Hollow feed and tack smelled heavy, like leather oil and dusty paper. Hollis walked over to a tall green safe he'd bought used from a dead bank in San Saba in 1961. He spun the old dial, pulled the door open. Reaching past some old sale ledgers, he slid out a brown envelope, worn soft at the corners. Inside sat a photocopied meeting transcript, dated June 11, 2019. The players: Garrett Pike, back when he was a senior partner at a Dallas land firm, alongside the deputy commissioner of the Texas General Land Office. The topic was a contingency plan, only to be triggered if the Hartley tract couldn't be secured through quiet, private negotiations. To force an eminent domain taking on behalf of a public-private water infrastructure consortium. The paper had both signatures, a date stamp, and the raised seal of the deputy commissioner's office. The original copy mysteriously vanished from the state archives in 2020. This is the only surviving copy. My nephew worked in that office, Hollis explained, pulled a file copy before they purged the cabinets. He passed away the following year, but he left this with me. I've waited 7 years to hand this over to somebody who'd actually use it right. Hollis handed the brown envelope to me. I passed it to Adeline. Her manicured fingers gripped it. They trembled slightly before she locked them down. It was enough. Backed by Adeline's sworn testimony, this paper was enough to void the Vista Larga corporate buyout. It would dissolve Garrett Pike from the board and trigger a federal conspiracy probe lasting years. Heading back to the ranch, Adeline didn't say a single word. I steered the 1998 Ford with one wrist on the wheel. Right at the second cattle guard, I eased the heavy truck to a halt and let it idle. Miss Voss, you can hand that paper back to Hollis today and pretend you never laid eyes on it. Head back to Dallas, sign the big deal, nobody would ever blame you. She stared down at the worn envelope resting on her lap. Didn't look up, I'd blame me. I gave her one slow nod. Dropped the truck back into gear, then we head to Austin Monday. In 3 solid weeks of talking, it was the very first time I'd actually used the word we. Adeline definitely caught the shift, but she didn't say a word. She turned toward the passenger window, staring out at the passing live oaks, watching the long trees blur by without really seeing them. When they finally eased up the Hartley driveway, little Ivy sprinted from the barn, small boots pounding, braids flying behind her. The kid did not even break. She grabbed Adeline in a fierce, sudden hug, squeezing her waist and letting go before the CEO could even react. "You're back, I'm back," Adeline said softly. That sharp corporate executive tone was completely gone. Wade watched quietly from the porch. Real wealth never rushes. He kept his hands stuffed in his worn flannel, taking his sweet time before stepping down to greet them. Monday dawned freezing and bright. Wade steered his heavy Ford truck down Highway 281 with Adeline sitting shotgun, the crucial brown envelope and a thick manila folder packed inside her expensive leather briefcase sat wedged firmly between them. Ivy was safe at a neighbor's house in Cedar Hollow, promised a morning of warm pancakes, stories, and brushing a little pony. Somewhere past Marble Falls, the heavy silence finally broke. They had spent 20 days living just miles apart, yet this was their first time actually exchanging real honest words. "My father went broke twice," Adeline confessed. She stared out at the river flowing beside them. "First when I was 9 and again at 15. He taught me one rule: never love anything that will not appreciate in financial value." He thought he was helping. Wade just kept his steady eyes on the asphalt. "My wife wrote her thesis on Comanche Springs range ecology back in '92. That is how we met. I was a junior and she was a senior. She asked if I knew anything about my own water. I said no. She called it a shame, so I said maybe she could teach me." Adeline smiled at the glass. "She would have liked you," Wade added. "Eventually, anyway. You and I both know real value doesn't need a sales pitch." That was her first genuine smile. They pulled into Austin just after midday. Theo Marchetti waited up in his 18th floor corner office, inside a solid stone building near Congress Avenue. Sleeves already rolled up, he reviewed the Hollis envelope in complete heavy silence. 90 seconds ticked by. He placed it down. "Wade, this is more than enough." "This is plenty. We file Wednesday." Adeline gently cleared her throat and spoke up. Mr. Marchetti, if I resign from Voss Meridian and surrender internal documents as a witness, can we file Tuesday? Theo glanced at Wade. Wade stared back at Adeline. Adeline locked her eyes on the bookshelf behind Theo and held her ground firmly. Tuesday morning, Theo finally agreed. That evening, they booked separate 8th-floor rooms, a quiet hotel over on West 6th Street. At exactly 10, Wade knocked firmly on room 812. Adeline opened it to find him holding a green, hand-corked quart bottle of water, chilled and dripping with fresh condensation. Helps you sleep, Eleanor always swore by it. She took the simple glass bottle. Gripping it with both hands, she asked, "Why do this with me, Wade? You could have easily won without me." Wade paused to calmly consider that. "Because you actually turned around, most people never do." He shut the door. She just stood there in the center of the room, holding that plain bottle for a solid minute before pouring a glass. Sitting on the bed, she sipped it slowly, no checking her smartphone, no opening her business laptop to manage the corporate chaos. When her glass was completely empty, she simply lay back on the comforter. Still fully dressed, she slept soundly for the first time in days. Back in Dallas, Garrett Pike made his 4th frantic call to her phone. None were answered. "You and I know it was over," he panicked, turning to his security director. "Watch how real power moves." 7 a.m. Tuesday, Adeline knocked on room 810. She wore the exact same corporate blazer as yesterday, gripping an empty water bottle by its neck. "I'm ready." Down at the Travis County Courthouse, the civil clerk opened at 9. Theo Marchetti was the very first lawyer inside. He dropped 3 filings at once. First up, a heavy civil complaint. Wade Holloway and Hartley Cattle Company directly suing Voss Meridian Land Holdings. And their board chairman, Garrett Pike, named personally. Plus 17 co-defendants, all accused of conspiracy to commit fraud, attempting to abuse eminent domain and blatantly violating Texas surface and groundwater laws. Document 2, Adeline Voss's sworn affidavit as a cooperating witness. The third was a sealed stack of internal records. Voss Meridian emails proving Garrett personally wrote that buried diversion clause, knowing the exact damage. Public by 10 a.m. By noon, the Dallas business press broke the story. By 1, Voss Meridian's market cap bled out 41%. At 2, the panicked board called an emergency session. They voted 7-1. Garrett Pike was out, effective immediately. Garrett cast that single bitter vote against his own firing. By 4, the FBI's Dallas office opened a formal fraud and conspiracy investigation. Wade and Adeline stepped out of that courthouse together. They didn't hold hands. They crossed Congress Avenue in the late Texas sun, walking 4 blocks to a quiet, tin-ceilinged coffee shop. Sitting by the window, Adeline pressed her hand flat against the worn wooden table. Wade rested his calloused hand just 5 centimeters from hers. Neither of them moved. "What happens to you now?" Wade asked. "I really don't know. The board might keep me or they won't. Either way, I am never walking back into that office the same woman." Wade just watched the street. "There's space at Hartley if you need time to think." The spare cabin sat empty since Eleanor's sister left. She finally looked at him. "Wade, that means a lot, what you just offered." "I know." Driving back to Cedar Hollow, her cell suddenly lit up. The board's outside counsel. She recognized the number, put them on low speaker, and just listened. They offered her interim chairman. They were doubling her base corporate salary, pleading with her to guide Voss Meridian through the mess and save the business. "I'll think about it," she replied, hanging up. Wade shot her a quiet glance. "You're considering it." She stared out at the dark, rugged edge of the Texas hill country. "I'm deciding if I really want to spend 10 years fixing Garrett's fragile empire, or if it's time I finally built something real for myself." Wade didn't ask what that meant. Real security doesn't need to pry. He kept driving. For 2 weeks, Adeline stayed quietly in the guest cabin behind Hartley's main house. It was perfectly modest, 1 simple room and a stove, a tin roof repainted green back in 2020, and a porch holding 2 cane-bottomed chairs. Adeline ditched the suits for stiff denim from the feed store and slipped on the leather boots Wade had silently left by her door. "You and I both know by week 1, they were covered in real mud." She sat on that porch every morning, drinking black coffee with Wade and Ivy. Picture this. On a Thursday, little Ivy taught Adeline to tie a proper cowboy knot, the kind that secures a halter to a post yet pulls free with one effortless tug. 2 loops, Miss Adeline, through the back. like a real knot, not a city knot. Adeline let out a bright, unpolished laugh she genuinely could not remember making before. She tipped her head back against the worn porch post. Wade watched from the kitchen window with his morning coffee, and he never looked away. Come the second Monday, she quietly turned down the corporate chairman's seat. Instead, she announced the launch of the Voss Meridian Land Trust, a nonprofit land conservation group officially chartered under Texas law, built specifically to shield family ranches from corporate buyouts and loud real estate development. Seeded with $40 million, drawn straight from her quiet whistleblower payout. Her own savings, plus cash from liquidating her flashy Dallas penthouse. On October 23rd, the grand jury finally nailed Garrett Pike on 4 federal fraud charges. The judge securely locked him in home confinement pending trial. His fragile shell company collapsed within a single week. Hollis Vance was called to testify. He showed up in his battered Stetson and a humble tie his late wife chose 40 years prior. He answered their fancy questions using short, dead honest sentences. When the old man stepped down, Wade was right there waiting in the hallway. Hollis rested a heavy hand on Wade's shoulder. Eleanor would have been proud, son. Wade simply nodded. He couldn't force a single word out. Marisol Reyes and her son Daniel were finally safe. He landed a solid Austin law job beyond Pike's grasp. She finally opened the old leather binder she'd securely hidden in a bottom drawer for 7 long years. Tucked safely inside, right behind the property deeds, sat a single folded sheet of cream stationery. Eleanor's personal handwriting, a legal addition to her will penned just 6 months before the crash. Marisol drove out to the Hartley Ranch that Friday night, placing it directly in Wade's hands. He sat down at the heavy, scarred kitchen table to read. It held one profound sentence he had genuinely never seen before. If I'm not there, Wade, find someone who can stand on this land without trying to own it. Wade read it twice. He carefully folded it. Sliding it into his worn flannel pocket, he stepped out onto the porch. Adeline sat on the top step with little Ivy, showing the girl how to track the first bright stars of December. By early December, the Voss Meridian Trust quietly bought up the entire Vista Larga tract for $89 million. Pennies compared to the bloated corporate buyout Garrett once feverishly chased. But plenty to clear the seller's note and quietly pay the lender. That grounded acreage was locked under a permanent, unbreakable conservation easement. Comanche Springs earned a rock-solid state-level protective status. No corporate pipeline would ever drain it. You and I know that massive Austin water contract got shoved to a coastal desalination plant, exactly where it always belonged. By mid-December, Adeline traded the cedar cabin for a remarkably modest rented house down on the quiet south edge of Cedar Hollow, near the Hartley estate, but respectfully not stepping on it. It featured a simple yellow door and a quiet east-facing porch. She truly loved it. She just wasn't ready to rush whatever was naturally growing between her and the main house. Wade completely understood. He never even asked. When she visited for Wednesday supper, he would just quietly set down a third plate. Imagine this, a clear afternoon just a few days before Christmas. Wade walked the property line dividing Hartley and Vista Larga, heavy wire coiled on his shoulder, a solid steel post driver gripped in his hand. You know that high, biting blue sky that only covers Texas in late December? We were at the exact same fence line where Adeline stood 3 months prior. Wearing city heels and a tailored blazer, calling my prime pasture her future corporate parking lot. Today she walked down my dirt road in scuffed work boots, carrying 2 coffees from the Dusty Bell. She handed me a cup. We worked in total silence for almost an hour. She held the wire tight while I drove those cedar posts deep into the hard caliche. Her hands actually had calluses now. Small, rough ones right on her thumbs, earned from 2 solid weeks of real honest ranch work. When that final post was firmly set, we stood up together, looking west across my land toward Comanche Springs, running cold, clear, and older than the state of Texas itself. Wade, she said quietly, I don't know what this is yet. I dropped the driver. I watched her for a long moment. You learn to read people the same way you read incoming weather. Doesn't have to be anything yet, Adeline. Land doesn't rush. She gave one nod, didn't even blink or look away. Then the soft thudding of small boots came up behind us. My little girl Ivy was leading Biscuit, braid swinging, her cheeks bright pink from the chill. She stepped right between us, sliding her little hand perfectly into Adeline's left, slipped her other hand into my right, turning the three of us gently to face the water. The spring was still flowing. It has always been flowing. It'll keep flowing long after us, after the fences, the wire, and whatever names you and I might sign on a piece of paper. I felt my daughter's tiny fingers gripping tight around my own hand. On Ivy's other side, I felt the presence of the corporate CEO who tried to buy me out in September, now standing here with me, wearing dirt on her boots. Standing in that same cold, watching the very same water. I didn't let go, and neither did Adeline. Some fences just mark where a property ends. Others mark exactly where things begin.